Hello everyone, I'm James. Today, we're diving into another truly horrifying real-life case. Please support the channel by subscribing and staying active. It really helps me out a lot. I'd be incredibly grateful for that. Let's get started. A student vanished from her own home in the middle of the night. No struggle, no witnesses, not a single clue. 1 minute she was safe in her bedroom, the next, she was gone. And what happened in those missing hours would leave an entire community horrified. Her name was Eve Carson. She was 22 years old, a senior at the University of North Carolina, and by all accounts, she was exceptional, class president, double major, volunteer, world traveler. Eve had done more before 25 than most people do in a lifetime. But none of that mattered after March 5th, 2008. That night, around 1:30 a.m., Eve's roommates were heading to a party. They invited her, but she said no. She had class the next day and wanted to study, so she stayed behind, alone in their house just off campus. 3 hours later, when her friends returned around 4:30 a.m., something immediately felt off. The front door was wide open, the lights were still on, but Eve was gone, so was her car. They tried calling her, no answer. Maybe she stepped out for something, maybe she fell asleep somewhere else. That's what they told themselves. But they were wrong. At 5:00 a.m., just 30 minutes after the roommates got home, a woman living about a mile away called 911. She said she woke up to gunshots, and then a scream. When police arrived, they found a body lying in the street. Young woman, no ID, no phone, just a cold, lifeless body with multiple gunshot wounds. They had no idea who she was. But later that morning, when Eve's friend walked into the police station to report her missing, officers showed her a photo of the victim. She broke down instantly. It was Eve. Once Eve's identity was confirmed, detectives rushed to piece together what had happened from 1:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. There was a 3.5-hour window. Somewhere in that gap, she'd gone from safe at home to dead on a dark street. Her roommates said she had been using her computer to study. Forensics confirmed her laptop was still active until around 3:30 a.m. That meant Eve was likely at home alive hours after her friends left. So how did she go from studying to being murdered just a mile away? Her car was missing. Her phone was gone. Her wallet and credit cards weren't at the scene either. Nothing pointed to who had done this, or why. But investigators started leaning toward robbery. When they checked Eve's phone records, the last signal pinged from a tower near a highway just outside of town, but the phone itself never found. Then came the first real break in the case. A car matching Eve's had been found abandoned only a few miles away. Detectives brought it in for fingerprinting and DNA analysis. At the same time, they pulled her bank records and saw something shocking. Just 18 minutes after her laptop was last active, 2 withdrawals had been made from Eve's bank account totaling $700. It was the daily ATM limit. Someone had tried to take out more, but got denied. They traced the transaction to an ATM near a shopping center, and this one had a camera. When detectives pulled the footage, they saw a man in Eve's car. He was in the driver's seat, withdrawing money with her card. But what made it worse, there was someone in the back seat. Was it Eve? The video quality was poor, and forensics couldn't say for sure, but the timeline matched. That withdrawal happened just after 3:30 a.m., and Eve's body was found at 5 a.m. Whoever this was didn't just rob her. They drove around with her, forced her to give up her PIN, and then they killed her. Police released the ATM footage to the media, hoping someone would recognize the man in the driver's seat. Within hours, the tips started flooding in, but none of them led anywhere. Then, on March 7th, 2 days after Eve's body was found, another attempt was made to withdraw money using her card. This time, it happened at a 24-hour convenience store in a nearby town. The card was declined, but the store had a working surveillance camera. When detectives pulled the footage, they saw a different man. It wasn't the same suspect from the ATM near the shopping center. Now there were two people, two suspects, which meant one of two things: either more than one person was involved, or the killer gave Eve's card to someone else. They released the second video too, and this time, it paid off. On March 12th, an anonymous tip came in. The caller said he recognized the guy from the second video. His name, Dario Atwater. Dario was 21 years old, and his record was long armed robbery, drug charges, assault. He'd been in and out of jail for years. In fact, he was supposed to appear in court just 2 days after Eve was murdered for carrying a gun while on probation. Detectives pulled up old mugshots and compared them to the surveillance video. It was a match, no doubt about it. They brought Dario in for questioning. He denied everything. But then, detectives found something else. Phone records showed Dario had been regularly communicating with a San Antonio 16-year-old named Lawrence Levet. He had a rap sheet too, and when detectives saw Lawrence's mugshot, they froze. It was him. He was the one behind the wheel of Eve's car in the first ATM video. Police moved quickly to arrest him, but Lawrence wasn't going down easy. He barricaded himself inside his house, and it took a SWAT team to drag him out. Still, both suspects denied being involved. So investigators did what they do best. They went after the data. Investigators pulled cell phone records for both suspects, and the data didn't lie. On the night Eve was murdered, both Dario and Lawrence's phones pinged off a cell tower near her neighborhood, despite the fact that neither of them lived in Chapel Hill. Detectives now had enough to build a theory. They believed the two suspects were driving around that night, looking for someone to rob, and when they passed by Eve's house and saw her alone, they made their move. According to what detectives later learned, the men broke into Eve's home, armed with guns. They forced her into her own car and made her drive to several ATMs around town. That's when they withdrew the $700, forcing her to give up her PIN. But it didn't stop there. They kept trying to get more money, but once they realized the account had hit its limit, they drove Eve to a wooded area on the edge of town. And there, somewhere dark and isolated, they shot her. Multiple times. No mercy, no hesitation, just cold, calculated violence. The public was outraged, not just at the crime, but at how the justice system had failed to stop Dario and Lawrence years earlier. Both had extensive records. Both had slipped through the cracks. Now, Eve Carson, someone who had dedicated her life to helping others, was dead because no one stopped them in time. Prosecutors made it clear they were going to pursue the death penalty against Dario. But Lawrence's case was more complicated. He was still a minor. So they played it smart. They offered Dario a deal confess, and they'd take the death penalty off the table. In exchange, he had to give them everything. And he did. In his confession, Dario admitted everything. He said it started with a phone call from Lawrence. Lawrence had the idea they'd head to the UNC campus late at night and find someone to rob. They didn't know Eve personally. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. As they drove through a quiet neighborhood, they saw her through the window alone, studying. That's when they stopped. Diario and Lawrence broke in with guns. They didn't wear masks. They didn't care. They forced Eve into her car and took control. She begged them to let her go. She promised not to tell anyone, but they didn't listen. They drove her around, from ATM to ATM, making her hand over her PIN. They took what they could, $700. It wasn't enough. And then, they decided to kill her. Because she'd seen their faces. Diario said that before they pulled the trigger, Eve asked them to pray with her. Instead, they opened fire. In April 2010, 2 years after the murder, Diario Atwater was sentenced to life in prison, plus 30 years in court. He turned to Eve's parents and said he was sorry, said he deserved everything he got. As for Lawrence Leavitt, he refused to confess. His trial began in 2011, despite his attorney's defense. Diario's confession and the physical evidence were overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But it wasn't over. In 2013, his sentence was overturned on appeal. The court ruled that life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Lawrence got a new trial. He spoke this time, told the court everyone makes mistakes, said he wasn't a monster. But he showed no real remorse. And once again, he was sentenced to life behind bars. Later, police linked Lawrence to another eerily similar case. Another student killed just 2 months before Eve. Same pattern, same method, but there wasn't enough evidence to make it stick. The charges were dropped. Eve's case didn't just make headlines, it sparked real change. North Carolina passed a new law targeting gang-related crimes with harsher penalties. It went into effect later that year. At UNC, a scholarship was created in Eve's name. A garden was built in her memory, and one of her closest friends, inspired by her death, auditioned for American Idol, saying Eve gave him the courage to chase his dream. Her legacy didn't die with her. But it should have never ended this way.